And so as we begin this season, as we begin this sermon series, as we take a look at what happens deep down inside if we allow God's love to seep down to the core of our being and the core of our existence, we begin today by talking about how love heals. And I'd like to look at this through the lens of a story that takes place in the Gospel of John. Please listen for the word of God. There it is. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the Sheep Gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie: the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" And so they asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse might happen to you." The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. This is the word of God for the people of God. I feel a little guilty. Last week, while you all were here in worship, I was standing waist deep in 85-degree azure blue water on one of the most beautiful tropical islands, most remote tropical islands in the world, Nungwi, Zanzibar, a small spit of sand on the very northern tip of the island of Zanzibar in Tanzania, the island that we named our dog after. I had gone down, as you all know, to Tanzania for a 2-day board meeting with African Enterprise in Dar es Salaam. And so at the end of the meetings, I took my day off and I flew the 15-minute jaunt it took over the channel to get to Zanzibar. And I had spent the day scuba diving on Saturday, spent the night there, was waiting for the taxi cab to pick me up in the morning to take me to the airport for the long trip back. And I went for one last dip in the water. And when I got out there, I looked back and I realized something that kind of blew me away. The first time I had been in Zanzibar was 20 years earlier, and the place looked nothing like it does now. But I could tell by the rock formations and the way that the beach was shaped that I was pretty much standing in the exact same spot where exactly 20 years earlier, in 1997, I had been wading through the water and inadvertently stepped down on a Zanzibar-sized sea urchin. You all know what a sea urchin is. Basically a tennis ball covered with big, fat, razor-sharp hypodermic needles that are covered in poison. Well, as soon as I stepped down onto this thing, 3 of the spines broke off deep inside of my foot, and my entire leg exploded into searing pain. I almost passed out, and then I almost threw up, and then I almost passed out again. I hobbled my way back in. At the time, it was just a campsite, and I went to the owner of the campsite to try to get some help, and he said, "Oh, no worries, mate, we've got you taken care of." He says, "This happens all the time, and we've got just the cure." He says, "We'll go and send our boy, and he's going to get the chief of the local village. Man's like 110 years old." But for the cheap cost of just one cold beer, he will come and he will fix you up just right. And he went on to say, the first thing he's going to do is he's going to take papaya milk and he's going to push and knead it into the holes to try to lube up them spines in your foot. And he said, and then he's going to take this big stick and he beats your foot until your foot swells up so it's nice and tight. And he said, and then, and here's the best part, he takes your foot and he chews and he sucks on the holes until the spines pop off into his mouth. It's amazing. It's the best deal in all of Zanzibar. I was like, there's no way I'm going to do that. And the guy said, oh, you have no choice. You got to do it. If you don't, it's just going to get infected. It's going to hurt more and more. It's going to go septic, and you're going to get really, really sick. I said, I don't care. He said, rubbish. And he sent the boy off to go get this guy. To which I responded very maturely by running away and going and hiding in my hut. I didn't come out the rest of the day or night. Early the next morning before the sun rose, I went out and I got a bucket of cold seawater and I soaked my foot in it, and then I put a few Band-Aids over the holes, and I got onto my motor scooter and I started driving back towards the Zanzibar airport with the fever already starting and the infection already beginning, and got the earliest flight I could off of the island. Well, there are certain things that we know how to heal. And we take things into our own peril when we don't follow those instructions, right? It's like science to us, quite literally. There are other things that heal by themselves over time, right? That we just leave alone and the healing just comes. But I think we all know that there are still other things for which that's not so easy. Isn't that right? We all have broken things that we carry around in our lives. Broken dreams, broken hearts, broken health, broken relationships. We're mortals, and mortals break easily. The question isn't whether we break. The question really, ultimately is, do I want to get well? Well, Jesus, one time, was heading up to Jerusalem for one of the 3 festivals that every adult Jewish male was expected to attend if you were within 20 miles of Jerusalem. And as he was coming up, he passed by a very famous pool in Jerusalem called Bethesda. There's actually a little bit of controversy over if this is exactly what it was called. Bethesda means the house of miracles, and that's what it's probably most typically called, but there's also some tradition that it's called Bethzatha, which means house of the olive. Now, I don't like olives, and Bethesda's a lot easier to pronounce anyway, so I call it House of Bethesda. But there was a tradition. It was a lot more than just the biblical tradition. A lot of people knew about this back in that time, in that age. This pool had a very long history of being a healing pool. It was a little bit like a mini Old Faithful. There were gases that would stir up in a spring underneath this pool from time to time, and as the gases would come up, then the water would froth and sort of boil like a jacuzzi. I think we in California, we understand this idea of climbing into a jacuzzi and it curing whatever ails us. Isn't that right? And so the belief was that when the water was stirred, the first person who would get down into that water, there was an angel who was stirring the water, and the first person to make it into the pool would be cured of whatever their disease or ailment was. And it seems a little cold or callous that Jesus meets this man who'd been there for 38 years as an invalid, lying on this mat. And the first thing he asks him is, do you want to get well? It seems a little ridiculous, doesn't it? I mean, you'd think the guy, are you kidding me? No, I'd like to stay crippled for another 38 years. And yet, when we take a closer look, we realize that maybe this wasn't such an unreasonable question after all. Maybe not for this man, but maybe not for any of us. Because isn't it true that we get used to the pains and the brokenness that we carry inside? That in many ways we become friends with the pain that we carry around. It becomes part of our identity and can at times shape us. We reshape our lives around the broken parts that we carry around with us. C.S. Lewis in The Great Divorce talks about our pain and our brokenness as a pet chameleon that we keep on our shoulder, and it has sharp claws that are constantly digging into our flesh and have us in pain, and it's constantly telling us terrible things, that you're no good and you're a failure and everybody's disappointed in you, and how could you possibly be as terrible as you are? And yet when God comes along and wants to kill the chameleon, we protect it as a cherished pet. Well, this man who'd been on this mat for 38 years, when you think about it, it only makes sense. I mean, what does he really want to get better? And how scary would that be if he did? I mean, if he's lived here this entire time, where would he live? Where would he even find a place to rest his head if he were well? What would he do? He's been a beggar for 38 years. What skills does he have? What else could he do? These are where all of his friends are. I think oftentimes, for all of us, sometimes we prefer the misery that we know to the mystery that we don't know, don't we? Jesus said, "Do you want to be well?" It's a fair question. And the man pretends like he doesn't even hear Jesus. He just keeps going. He says, "Sir, when the water is troubled, I have no one to help me into the water, and somebody always gets down before me." This man has a plan, right? A plan he's been clinging to for what? 38 years? How is that working for you? But we're no different. Isn't that true? We always, some of us aren't on the A plan anymore. Some of us have moved to the B plan or the C plan or maybe the X, Y, or Z plan. But we always have an idea of how we're going to fix our own brokenness, right? What we're going to do, the thing that we need. I think if Jesus hadn't interrupted this man, he would have probably started talking about needing a committee to figure out a way to make this whole pool area work better. Maybe they could get one of those number systems like they have at the deli counter at Ralph's, where you take a number and they say, "Now serving number 38. But if you notice in the story, Jesus doesn't help the man with his plan, right? He doesn't freeze everybody else when the water starts to be troubled so that this man could be the first one in there. He doesn't teleport the man from where he is into the water when it happens. Jesus' plan for him is something altogether different, isn't it? And he tells him, "Stand up, pick up your mat, and walk." Because God's primary purpose in our life is to bring us healing to the things that are broken and hurting deep inside. We often talk about here, we say that the whole point of our faith is to accept God's love and acceptance and forgiveness. Well, it's just another way of saying to accept God's healing in our life. Throughout the Scriptures, this is God's primary reason for coming to us, for wanting to be in relationship with us, is to heal us of the things that are broken and hurting inside so that we can become the people that we've always meant to be, the people that we were created to be. From the very beginning of the Scriptures, we see it over and over again. As early as Exodus, we see the entire Bible summed up in one verse, in just 20 words. We see it all. Exodus 3, verse 7. "I have seen your misery. I have heard your cry. I know your suffering, and I have come to help." It was the same thing when Jesus comes into this world and he begins his ministry. Do you remember? He starts his ministry by going back to his own home synagogue in Nazareth, and they ask him to read the scripture, and he gets up and he pulls out, do you remember, the scroll of Isaiah? And he opens it up to chapter 61, the one verse that sums up the ministry, the reason that he's here more than anything else. He says, I have come to proclaim release to the captives. God has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted. And so first we need to understand that we want to be healed. Yes, I want to be healed of the broken things that I harbor inside. And then sometimes there is a part that we need to play. Sometimes we need to forgive somebody in order to be healed. Sometimes we need to accept someone else's forgiveness. There are times when we need to forgive ourselves, that we will never be healed until we let go and forgive ourselves of the things that we have done. But sometimes we need to forgive God. Isn't that true? So often we think that God has caused whatever has happened in our lives, or at least let it happen, and so we become resentful of God when something has happened in our lives. There are times when the things that are hurting and broken inside of us are things we've brought upon ourselves, but sometimes there is nothing we've done to bring on the hurt and the brokenness. People who we love get sick and die. Children get cancer. We know that. Trusts get broken. Relationships get shattered. Financial systems crumble. Our health deteriorates. We go through a divisive political campaign and we're hurting and angry about it. We go through things at this church and we're broken and we're hurting. And God is telling us throughout the scriptures, God is telling us that God comes to heal the brokenhearted. And so yes, we need to understand, we need to be willing to admit that we want to be healed. We need to do whatever it is that we need to do. But then ultimately we need to let go and give it to God. We need to be able to trust that God can do things in our lives that our own plans have not been able to do. That God is able to fix things and to heal things that we have not been able to fix or heal on our own. A couple of years ago, we went bowling back in New Jersey with our kids. We took them to one of our favorite bowling alleys. I don't know, how many of you bowl? Any bowlers in here? Or been bowling ever? Most people? Well, there's this really weird thing that happens. I don't know if you watch most people when they let go of the bowling ball, the things that they do afterwards. You know, the way that they try to, no, try to wave it or threaten it to do what they want. You know how people kind of like, they contort their bodies and they hop on one foot and they hunch up their shoulders, all like they somehow magically can make this ball move the way that it's supposed to. When we went with our kids, there's Clayton. There's Ryan. It's like we think that we have some magical connection to the ball. You know, when I go bowling, I need to remember that there's certain things that I can do. I can stand the right way. I can have the right posture. I can bend my knee just so. I can have a good follow through and a smooth release. But once I release the ball, it's kind of no longer in my hands, right? You want some good advice for a better bowling experience? When you let go of the ball, let it go. And the same thing can be said for our relationship with God. So many of the hurts that we carry deep down inside, we need to be able to let God into. To let it go, to put it at the foot of God, at the foot of the cross, and trust that God is capable of healing the things that we are not. What would it look like in your life if God was to step in and to heal the things that are broken deep down inside? What would it look like in your life if God was able to release you from the burdens that you carry from the past, the deep down hurts that haven't gone away any other way? If God released those and you became the person you've always wanted to be, the person that you were created to be. Throughout the scriptures, we're told over and over and over again that the primary purpose of God in our life isn't to make us a good person. It's not to make us do things or stop doing things or even to evangelize the world. The primary purpose is to reach inside and heal our broken hearts. What would it look like in your life in this season if you allowed God to do that? We want to spend some time in silent meditation. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you the things I want you to think about, and then just give us some time in silence. At some point, Catherine is going to begin a song, and then some point through there, she's going to call for the offering, but that'll be down the road. But what I want you to do is spend some time first identifying what is something broken, some pain or hurt inside of my life that I might allow God to have God's way with this Lenten season. For some of us, it's right under the surface. As easy as scratching the surface, we know exactly what it is. It's right there on our sleeve all the time. We know exactly what we're looking for. For others, it's going to take some work. There are hurts and pains that we have pushed down layer by layer, year after year, further and deeper until they reside in small little caves in the depths of our souls that we hardly ever visit anymore. And when you find that pain, ask yourself, ask God, what is my part in helping to heal this brokenness? Is there somebody I need to forgive? Is there somebody I need to ask forgiveness from? Do I need to forgive myself or ask for God's forgiveness? Or even forgive God? What is my part in the healing of this pain? But then finally, I want you to spend some time reflecting and meditating on what would it look like to give this pain over to God, to lay this at the foot of the cross, and to allow God to step in and pursue God's plan in our pain instead of our own. What would it look like for us to even crack the door open so that God could begin to get inside of it and do God's work? Let's spend some time in silent meditation. If you're comfortable, you might want to uncross your legs, get into a comfortable seating position. If you're open to it, maybe you want to put your hands with your palms open, facing up on your lap as a symbol of being open to God's presence. If you're comfortable, maybe you want to close your eyes. And let's begin by taking a few deep breaths in and out. Slowly inhale and exhale. Let us spend some time asking God what God might want to do in our lives in this Lenten season.